Thank you for your attendance tonight. This museum, its board, and Margaret Ann have done a masterful job of offering Rustonites the history of our parish and of Ruston. My name is Terry Fulton. My mother was born and reared in Shoeburnt and was graduated from Louisiana Tech in 1943. I, however, was born and reared in Texas, where I spent most of my adult life. When my husband retired in 2003, we made Ruston our home. In 2004, I was invited to join the Pioneering Club, which I happily did as a way to make new friends. I did know about the Pioneering Rose Garden, but I had no inkling about the club's rich history entwined with Ruston. Through these years, I've learned much about roses. I've been a past president, and I have learned about and worked on the history with our longtime historian, Mrs. Virginia Selly, who has since passed away. Just recently, I read this quote by author Randolph Russell. "History is all around us, and it provides an unlimited supply of fascinating stories. Looking back gives us a better perspective of our place in the world, helps us recognize how valuable our time is, makes us appreciate the struggles and successes of those who preceded us, and encourages us to make our own contributions to the country." Tonight's topic loosely, I'm turning my phone off so my husband won't get on to me. Tonight's topic loosely is the women's clubs of Ruston. In particular, it is the Pioneering Club, which is celebrating its 120th anniversary this year. Since 1899, women of Ruston in this club have been contributing to the community in a myriad of ways. Our initial meeting was born out of the Louisiana Chataqua. For just a moment, let's look at some individual threads of life in different parts of the country within the same basic time frame and how those threads have woven together to impact our personal reality here in Ruston. For example, Charles Dickens. Did you know that the British author Charles Dickens could be considered the father of the women's club movement in the United States? Now, most certainly that was not his plan. Early in 1868, the Press Club of New York gave a dinner honoring the esteemed author. Mrs. J.C. Crowley, nicknamed Jenny June, and some other newspaper journalist women sought admittance to the dinner and were told, "No women are wanted." Thereupon, Mrs. Crowley, in March of the same year, organized a club of her own, composed entirely of women. She chose the name Sorosis, S-O-R-O-S-I-S. Didn't want you to get confused with the advertisements. It's a Greek word meaning an aggregation, a sweet flavor of many fruits. Most men and many women gave the club little chance for survival. But Sorosis did survive and thrived. 21 years later, in 1889, Mrs. Crowley invited guests from 61 clubs meeting in 18 states to come to Chicago to federate and learn to work together. Our Louisiana was represented by the New Orleans Women's Club. The General Federation of Women's Clubs, GFWC, was founded shortly thereafter in 1890. Its headquarters in Washington, D.C. is a national historic landmark and is one of the world's largest and oldest women's volunteer service organizations in the world. Now, over in southwestern New York State, around 1874, a Methodist minister and his businessman friend started a summer retreat along a local lake. The 17-mile-long lake narrowed dramatically right in the center. The local Iroquois Indians called it, quote, the bag tied in the middle, unquote, or two moccasins tied together, or in their language, Chataqua. The retreat quickly grew to be a popular source of adult education as the lectures presented the latest thinking in politics, economics, literature, science, and religion. Down in North Louisiana, just a few years later, in 1884, the small town of Ruston was being laid out and populated along the exciting East-West Railroad, which was expanding through the nation. Many of the new townspeople were merchants, semi-educated farmers, and travelers from other parts of the country. Dr. Frances Fletcher, Pioneer member and Louisiana Tech professor of English, wrote in her preface to the Louisiana Tech Bulletin, Historical Studies of Lincoln Parish, quote, national historians have pointed out that the pioneers who came west on the route that is now Highway 80 were in the main people of superior class. Nearly all of them were of the Anglo-Saxon descent. Their manner of speech was beautiful, and they were gracious and well-bred. Deeply religious, they had a high sense of duty and were bound by close family ties. These are some of Lincoln Parish's ancestors. Many had heard of the Chataqua.
Terry, can you talk louder? They're not hearing good about.
Really? Okay. I didn't want to blast you out. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Joe. Around 1889, a founding committee of Ruston citizens filed papers in the office of the Lincoln Parish Clerk of Court to form the Louisiana Chataqua for literary, education, and scientific purposes. It met in Ruston for roughly 15 years, from 1890 to 1906. Many of this museum's programs have looked at the Chataqua storied history, so I will not, except to tell you of two interesting things that caught my attention as I've worked on the Paiurian files. An old letter in the files was written in the summer of 1898 or 1899 from a lady who later became a member, writing to her young daughter who was staying with friends in Shreveport. I quote, "The Chataqua opened better this season than ever before. I go out quite often at night and enjoy it very much. Rosa's vine has covered the frames. I think it's the prettiest place out there. I know you have heard all about the fire. Ruston was without medicine for several days. Dr. Harrell said they could use castor oil and axle grease. Very good medicine when you can't do better. He thought for a while that all the business part of town would burn. It was an exciting time." End quote. Perhaps the Chataqua program some year could be on parish or city fires that seriously impacted the area, and perhaps you've already done that and I was not aware of it. Anyway, another interesting fact was told by Miss Sarah Wafer, a one-time hostess here at the Lincoln Parish Museum and a Pioneer member. In her April 2000 newspaper article titled, "It All Began with the Chataqua," she reported that basketball was first introduced publicly to this area in 1895 by a Miss Land of Shreveport. She brought a team that played a blue and gold exhibition game and then taught classes in the sport. Quote, "It was a bright thought of a bright woman. This exhilarating game has been an attractive feature of each week's exercises, and all have engaged in the sport, from the staid professors to the most joyous maid." Basketball has definitely been an important part of Ruston life. Thanks in large part to the educational emphasis at Chataqua, the Industrial Institute and College of Louisiana was created here in Ruston in 1894. We currently know that college as Louisiana Tech University. This is a women's club timeline that I did for another program a couple of years back, and it goes through the dates that we just discussed. 1868, Charles Dickens spoke. The new club was founded by the women. 1869, women only for cirrhosis. Chataqua, 1874. 1884, Ruston was founded. 1889 through 1906, the Louisiana Chataqua met here in Ruston. 1894, Industrial Institute and College of Louisiana was created. We have our beloved Louisiana Tech. And then in 1899, the Pioneering Club of Ruston was founded. Women seeking a voice and knowledge, Chataqua summer classes for all ages, and a young, growing town with transportation somewhat easily available in that era at least. All of these diverse threads bring us to the Pioneering Club. The founding of this club, August 2nd, 1899, was inspired by some of the women attending Chataqua. Remember, people came from all over the state and even neighboring states to hear the lectures and the entertainers. So representatives from the women's clubs in Natchitoches, Shreveport, and New Orleans met with 16 Ruston women in a Chataqua building to discuss the organization of a social, civic, and study club. The Pioneering Club is the result. The club's first civic interest was the beautification of the Chataqua stage and grounds during each session the entire month of July. Now remember, that tabernacle could hold 2,000 people, so that stage was not small. Members who did not fulfill their Chataqua duties were fined $3. $3 in 1903 is the equivalent to $87.46 today. This is a picture that Mr. Nolan Eller provided our club from the Tech archives. It's worth looking at kind of close. These are a group of the women out in the grounds of the Chataqua, and you can see their long dresses. We're July, wear long dresses, and we have to tote water in wooden buckets from the mineral springs on the back of the property up to where the stage was. Just have to appreciate it. The Pioneering Club of Ruston affiliated with the Louisiana Federation of Women's Clubs in 1900, and then the General Federation of Women's Clubs in 1907. We ended our affiliations with both groups in 2005. At one point, there was a Ruston Federated Women's Clubs, including Arts Club, and someone I spoke with remembers being part of the program at the Arts Club, the Cosmos Club, the Coterie Club, Culture Guild, Junior Guild, Latera Club, and our Pioneering Club. Our files hold many award certificates earned by the Pioneering Club in the 5th District, Louisiana Federation through the years. In the parlor is a table with some memorabilia of the awards and the hours, the record keeping of the hours, and as well as some of our former members on that table in there. To earn these awards, members had to keep a record of the volunteer hours, which came to many hundreds of hours. There is an entire file drawer at my home full of Louisiana Federation papers and records of our work with that group, and I have not even started to look through that. So no telling what we'll find in there. We had to list the number of projects in many areas, and this involved a great deal of paperwork. People have asked me, where did the name Pioneering come from? 2 things contributed. Number 1, on the Chataqua grounds was a natural mineral spring from which the club members daily toted their water in the wooden buckets for the flowers that they had cut to grace the stage. One historian reported that flower beds were not too successful due to the hard, rugged soil and the many stones. Number 2, education was of vital interest to these women. After lengthy discussion, they took as their motto some lines from Alexander Pope's poem, Essay on Criticism. A little learning is a dangerous thing. Drink deep, or taste not the Pierian spring. For shallow draughts intoxicate the brain, and drinking largely sobers us again. Now, the Pierian spring mentioned in Mr. Pope's poem was recognized in that era as a metaphorical source of knowledge about art and science. Pieria was a region of ancient Greece, home of Mount Olympus, and was believed to be the home of the Muses, capital M, the deities of the arts and sciences. In Greek mythology, it was believed that drinking from the Pierian spring would bring you great knowledge and inspiration. Thus, Pope is explaining how if you only learn a little, it can intoxicate you and make you think that you know a great deal. But when drinking largely, it sobers you so that you are wise and have a greater understanding. Wisdom on many topics, whether civil, civic, or cultural, was one of their goals. So they called themselves the Pierian Club. They met 2 times per month those first years, and when they answered roll call each meeting, they quoted a different line from a poem or a writing. In the yearbooks, we have some yearbooks here, and a constitution from 1899. In the yearbook, you can see various quotes that were printed. That was not necessarily what they spoke, but it was applicable to the program. We have before you some of the earliest yearbooks for you to look at. Please handle them gently with clean hands. Early programs were given by 3 women on a panel where each lady discussed the designated topic from a different perspective. The lessons could get a little bit long. They also gave bibliographies with their reports. That just blew me away. They obviously had a thirst for knowledge about the world, its leaders, its history, and their place in it. April 22nd, 1916 meeting, and here is a copy of it from a carbon copy of the program. Was a debate. Resolved. Louisiana is ready for full suffrage. Affirmative, Mrs. George Thatcher and Mrs. N.M. Smith. Negative, Mrs. W.K. Duncan and Mrs. Rosa Colvin. Decision of the judges based on the arguments. Decision of the club on the ground, 4. So they were for full suffrage in the state in 1915-16. The club decided in the 30s to make efforts to maintain its history. We inherited boxes of newspaper clippings, pictures. You can imagine, 120 years? Well, not back then. In the 30s, that would have been about 40 years, maybe. There's so much to absorb, it is difficult to glean tidbits to share with you. I want to leave you with 3 impressions. 1, in 1908, some of you may remember this house. Roberta
That's the powerful one. You might do better without them. Why don't you just don't use them, just try to.
Some of my friends can't hear.
I do not need,
Huh? Okay. In 1908, Roberta Vaughn and her Methodist minister husband and 4 children came to Ruston. The Methodist Orphanage Board had borrowed $13,000 from a prominent Ruston businessman to build an orphanage here. Brother Vaughn was to operate the new orphanage and raise the money to pay it off. Due to hard work, he paid off $11,000 the first year. But it took another 4 years to pay that remaining debt. Meanwhile, the family lived in the orphanage. Tragically, their baby daughter lost her life in an accident. So, in 1912, the family moved to Marouge and took another pastorate. While there, the little daughter of a church member was killed. The parents consulted Brother Vaughn for a suitable memorial for their daughter. He suggested a home for the superintendent of the Methodist orphanage in Ruston. The diocese bishop directed the Vaughns to return to Ruston after 8.5 months' absence to build and occupy this home. This is the Edith Higginbotham House, Memorial House. It was large and spacious. There they lived for 28 more years. And during those years, over 1,000 children knew the love and motherly concern and support of Roberta Vaughn. More than 100 received college degrees. She was also a competent contributing Pierian member who gave hundreds and hundreds of roses away as part of her ministry. In 1938, the club initiated the acknowledging and marking of the historic road called Old Wire Road. A few miles. How many of you have seen this? Okay. Some of you have. Some of you have. A few miles north of Ruston was a major thoroughfare from Memphis to all places southwest. First, an Indian trail, then a Monroe-Shreveport stage line, then a telegraph line. Through Pierian efforts, the bronze marker was put in place and still stands at the intersection of Highway 167 and the Homer Highway. You go left to Homer, right toward Monroe on 3072. So if you turn right toward Monroe, look immediately to your left and you will see this marker. Pierians also provided bronze markers honoring the tech faculty or the administrative officers who died in service while officially connected with the college. These plaques hang in the foyer of Howard Auditorium. Did you know that Harry Howard was the first graduate of Tech? Many of you probably did. Those of you that are steeped in the history of Tech. He also served in the administration. The design of the plaque is a replica of the entrance to the old administration building, which was destroyed by fire in January of 1936. And here's the picture. These two black and white prints came from the book by the Pfister family. And I was going to bring mine, but I have misplaced it. Sharon's report has two pictures from Mr. Harris's postcard book. So you can see where they came up with the image for the memorial. I will now turn the program over to my close friend Sharon Thomas, a very active member since 1999 and also a past president.
Pierians have been active since the beginning, and I have to tell this one short story before I start on exact things that I can document. At our meeting one day, we were talking about Wesley Harris's book, Neither Fear Nor Favor. And I mentioned the scene where the women marched to the jail to bring food to the deputy sheriff that was incarcerated there. And before I could get my thought out, somebody said, I bet they were Pierians. and I suspect there were some there or either some future Pierians. The objectives for the Pierian Club were and continue to be intellectual, civic, and social improvement. Over the past 120 years, the club has undertaken a large variety of civic projects. After the demise of Chataqua in 1905, the club's activities turned toward Ruston and Ruston schools. Pierians furnished 65 chairs for the auditorium of the old Ruston High School when eating facilities were not sufficient. They helped purchase instruments for the band. Arbor Day was observed for many years by planting trees on school grounds. The club helped to see that trash cans were placed on business streets and corners of Ruston and urged the city to eliminate blind corners. Pierians urged an anti-spitting law be passed and sent petitions to the mayor and the town council showing the need for this law. Pierian Miss Hetty Hale made the Lincoln Parish Police Jury aware of public health issues and laid the foundation for the public health services for the parish. The Chamber of Commerce took over the Pierian project to number and name the streets in Ruston. The Pierian Club stated early on, the club fosters good citizenship and is ever ready and willing to cooperate in the building up of the community by stressing the importance of registering, voting, and strictly adhering to all law observance. Remember, women were only granted the right to vote in 1920. Pierians continue to stress the importance of being well-informed voters today, and everybody remember, we've got an election coming up. In 1932, the Pierian and Cosmos Clubs cooperated with the George Washington National Bicentennial Movement in presenting a George Washington pageant and drama. More than 65 women participated in its production and performance to approximately 900 guests. The Ruston Daily Leader gave the production a very positive write-up, and throughout the years, the Leader has reported on many Pierian activities. In 1937, Pierians wrote a petition to Superintendent H.L. Campbell asking him to include a kindergarten in the local school. The club helped with civil defense and with the Red Cross work during World War I and II. In World War II, they changed from having 2 meetings a month to having 1 meeting a month for the club and 1 meeting a month to help with the Red Cross in making bandages. Member Mrs. W.C. Symington was chair of the Waste Fat campaign for the parish. As part of the salvage campaign, women were asked to save rags, cans, fats, and silk hose. In 1943, Mrs. Symington was the first and only female member of the city council. The club and their families bought thousands of dollars of defense bonds for $18.50 each. They would mature in 20 years for $20, which wasn't a real big profit there. I did come across a fundraising idea which the Pierians participated with Women's Federated Clubs of the 5th District. I think I understand why it was used only once. It was called Operation Waistline. The money was needed to buy a mimeograph machine for the 5th District President's office. You were to donate 1 cent for each inch around your waist. Now, for some unknown reason, that was never used again. The Pierian Rose Garden in Railroad Park has been a major civic project of the club. In 1933, Mrs. B.H. Rainwater had just assumed chair of the Civic Committee when she and her husband were asked by her brother, Mr. T.L. James, to accompany him on a walk in Railroad Park. There, under the oak trees, they discussed how could the park be improved. The rose garden was born in their minds that afternoon. Mr. James purchased 700 rose bushes, and he officially dedicated the rose garden to the Pierian Club in 1934. The beds were the length of the city block between Vienna Street and Trenton Street. The club has shared blossoms with hospitals, homes of shut-ins, churches, and many others through the years. Roses were given to servicemen and placed in the dining cars when the troop trains stopped in Ruston. A resolution from the joint civic committees of Ruston clubs, which Pierian Cosmos Arts and the Garden Club, concerning the beautification of Railroad Park on the south side, recommended the project be turned over to the Chamber of Commerce. Pierian minutes stated that plans, as drawn up by Lambert Landscaping Company of Shreveport for the beautification of the south side of Railroad Park, had been bought by the city and were to be carried out in time. We're just not sure when that time is going to be. In 1946, the club went on record to the City Council as opposing converting Railroad Park to a parking lot. In the 60s, the club was in danger of losing the Rose Garden and Railroad Park to commercial development, and they urged the City Fathers not to let this happen. In '81, the railroad decided to sell their part, and the J.C. James spearheaded a drive to raise funds to save it. Pierians gave $500 for the rose beds, and another member of Pierian gave an additional $500. And with many other donations, the park was saved. The city has worked with the Pierians through the years to help maintain the Rose Garden. In 1995, the roses were moved to the East Georgia Fire Station when the park was being renovated, and with the cooperation of the city, remaining roses have now returned to Railroad Park. An original marker which commemorates Mr. James' donation was also returned. A recent marker now gives the brief history of the roses. The Pierian Club has been interested in libraries from the beginning. In the 20s and 30s, the club had its own small library located on the second floor of the James Building. The club sent letters and a resolution to senators and representatives of the 5th District regarding the Citizens Library movement from the time of the first state demonstration library through the passage of the tax measure by the parish for library financing. The Pierian Club actively worked in its cause. The Lincoln Parish Library, built in 1963, was strongly supported by the Pierian Club. In '64 and '66, the club gave funds for new furniture. Pierians continue to support the library and to support library tax renewals. The club worked in conjunction with other clubs, the Junior Guild, Culture Guild, Arts Club, Cosmos, Latira, and Latira, to raise funds for a variety of causes. Pierians joined other federated clubs in the nation in writing letters to Saddam Hussein of Iraq to seek a peaceful solution to the Persian Gulf crisis. In '76 and '77, the new museum, which is right here, in the Davis House, was an ongoing project along with other clubs in town. In 1978, the Pierian Club became a charter member and continues to support the museum today. Pierians have researched and reported on a wide variety of important local, national, and international topics through the years. In 1938, Mrs. R.E. Smith spoke on Can Women Do It? She expressed that all was not right in the world, but if women would accept their responsibilities and take advantage of their opportunities, then they could help to make it right. Her inspiring talk ended with these words: grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the living of these days. And this is certainly just as true today as it was in 1938, because we continue to need wisdom and courage for the living of these days. 1942, Mrs. Ruby Pierce, chair of the yearbook committee, wrote in the foreword of the yearbook on the subject of the programs for the year. She said, "Today, our consciousness is absorbed with national defense and our desire to serve our country in her various capacities of need. But let us remember that from the complexities of today's problems, we must salvage a courage that will sustain us in the belief that the security of life, which was given us by our forefathers, is a heritage worth fighting for." These Lest We Forget programs are presented with the conviction that we must maintain a deep appreciation and a wise understanding of this heritage, lest we forget that it is the foundation upon which the American way of life has been built, and that only through its continuation may our security in this way of life endure. In 1949, the Arts Club suggested that the two clubs study the same topic for the year, which was Ruston and Lincoln Parish. The research of these two clubs began several years before the establishment of the North Louisiana Historical Society and the Lincoln Parish Historical Society. From this beginning, a number of Pierians did a great deal of extensive original research for 10 years, some of them. Some of their extensive work was published in the Louisiana Polytechnic Institute Bulletin entitled Historical Studies of Lincoln Parish, and also in the book Lincoln Parish History, which was published in 1976 for the American Bicentennial. Pierian Catherine Hale Smith researched over 35 cemeteries in Lincoln Parish. She found the earliest settlers left little trace of their cemeteries. Some planted cedar trees or crepe myrtles or chinaberry trees at the corner of their burial plots. Sometimes there were headstones found from ironstone or petrified wood. Some burial grounds had been abandoned, and through personal interviews with local people, she was able to locate these. She found that records of the earliest settlers rarely existed. The earliest date found on a marker was the family burial plot of Daniel Colvin, and it was called the Cady Graveyard. The name on the marker was Sarah, consort of John Johnson, departed life September the 20th, 1826, aged about 24 years. As she realized that so many of the early settlers were lost to history, she thought of the lines from William Cullen Bryant's poem, Thanatopsis. All that tread the globe are but a handful to the tribes that slumber in its bosom. Mrs. Smith's research covers 49 pages in the Lincoln Parish history. In 1959, the 60th anniversary of the Pierian Club, member Margaret Towers Monroe wrote, "The years and the inventiveness of man have brought many changes to Ruston, but the Pierian Club, one of the oldest literary clubs in the state, still adheres to the ideals set forth in its very inception. Its members have exemplified the finest of Southern Christian womanhood, and through these 60 years, they have contributed to all phases of Ruston's civic, social, and educational life. Their influence helped mold the thinking of Ruston citizens on many vital subjects. Present-day members of the club take just pride in their fine heritage and consider it a challenge to continue to make the Pierian Club the vital force it has been in our community's affairs. Pierians in 2019, on the 120th anniversary of the club, continue to strive toward Mrs. Monroe's challenge. With the addition of new generations of ladies, we can continue to be a positive force for decades to come. At the beginning of our meetings, we always say the Pledge of Allegiance and we repeat the club collect. The collect was written in 1904 as a prayer for the day by Mary Stewart, a high school principal in Longmont, Colorado. She was a member of women's clubs of town and country. She stated, "I call it a collect for club women because I felt that women working together with wide interest in large ends, which is a new thing under the sun, that perhaps they had a need for a special petition of their own." Indeed, the collect has been reprinted in many lands and recited by club women all over the world. We feel the words are just as meaningful today as they were in 1904. And Kathy Roney is going to read the collect for us.
Keep us, O God, from pettiness. Let us be large in thought, in word, in deed. Let us be done with fault-finding and leave off self-seeking. May we put away all pretense and meet each other face to face without self-pity and without prejudice. May we never be hasty in judgment and always generous. Teach us to put into action our better impulses, straightforward and unafraid. Let us take time for all things. Make us to grow calm, serene, gentle. Grant that we may realize it is the little things that create differences, that in the big things of life we are at one. And may we strive to touch and to know the great common human heart of us all. And, O Lord God, let us forget not to be kind.
We've enjoyed looking back at how the Pierians have impacted Lincoln Parish and Ruston. What lies ahead for our club? As our membership has aged, fewer members can physically help deadhead the roses, which is currently our primary civic responsibility. In our meetings, we still discuss voting issues, like our upcoming elections, and current events, what's going on in the world. But we also look forward to a new generation of Ruston women who love this community, who can appreciate the heritage of this club, who can physically work in the Rose Garden along with us, and who have a vision for how they too can impact for positive the Ruston community. And that's our Pierian Club. Do you have any questions? Thank you.